to Marcia and let her introduce Michelle.
Okay, Michelle Mauck is the Director of Sponsored Programs on the Missouri campus of ATSU. As a certified grant writer, Michelle works primarily in pre-award activities, helping faculty and administrators to find and evaluate funding opportunities, coaching investigators to present their project ideas in ways that meet or exceed funder expectations, building budgets, and shepherding proposals through the submission process. In addition to her grantsmanship work, Michelle has 20 years experience in health professions education and training, including 9 years at ATSU and 11 years administering a community-based nonprofit agency in Northeast Missouri. So with that, I'll hand it over to Michelle.
Great. Well, thank you very much for asking Sponsored Programs to present today, and for that introduction too. We have the introduction or the title slide up here, and I guess before I jump into that, I came at this presentation today thinking that we probably had a variety of different listeners in our audience. So there may be some full-time faculty, and that you have a lot of teaching hours and maybe only a small carve out for grants or for research work. I thought we might have some adjunct faculty in the audience, and that you potentially are working part-time for multiple institutions, wearing lots of hats, juggling a lot. And then I thought we might also have some public health students in the audience, and that you're thinking about your career launch, or maybe you're already very active in your career and thinking about other community needs and how you could do good work and maybe change some things in the workplace that you're currently in. So I hope that there's a little something for everyone in this presentation. We're gonna try to offer something for everyone today. And whoops, hang on a second while I manage two different mice here. Here we go. So in terms of learning objectives, what I was intending for us to get out of this today was to talk about these three things. I think we're going to spend the bulk of our time looking at budget factors and things that are critical for budget building and determining funder fit. But I also wanted you to know that, grantsmanship these days is really high stakes competition. So there are fewer grants being offered. Many funders are looking for electronic submissions. So they're looking for really high stakes stuff right now. We have to do our best in our long range planning to think about how to be competitive a year from now, 2 years from now, maybe even 3 years from now. So investigators really need to be thinking about their long range plans. It's important to think about maybe when you're starting to start with smaller grants and building your preliminary data, getting to the point where you have publishable findings, and that will help to spur your competitiveness on the larger grants or potentially federal applications. So planning, chronological planning is really key in grantsmanship. A little bit about our office and what we do. Sponsored Programs is commonly referred to as SP. We're a service-oriented team, and we have a comprehensive staff that we work for all 6 schools all the time. Our seasoned sort of staff or professionals, we have specific areas of expertise, but anytime a proposal or investigator comes our way, we are trying to maximize the competitive edge. So we'll shuffle around our staff. So we don't have only one set of staff that will work with you. We're always looking to customize what's going to work best. And as faculty coming towards sponsored programs, you don't need to worry about finding the right specialist. Just get in touch with anyone on the team, and we'll help discern what it is that we can best do for you given the scope of work and the time that's available. In the last fiscal year that ended this past June 30th, ATSU administrators and faculty across all 6 schools, the museum, the Research Institute, we had 106 active grant projects underway. And the vast majority of those are service and education, but clearly we also have some clinical science grantsmanship and some basic science as well. I mentioned the funding climate is just super competitive. Gone are the days when funders were flush with money and they saw too few good ideas to support. There are lots of good ideas out there now. So today's project director or principal investigator, a PD or PI, I might use that in the presentation, they have to bring a really well-constructed proposal. They have to have a solid research plan, letters of support. They have to be outcomes-oriented. And then on top of that, they're going to have to show through their CV that they have the right skills and experience, a track record, and publications to justify their claims that they're the right person carrying out the right project at the right time for the right price that the funder wants to pay. So super competitive. Our strategy in SP is that, we want you to succeed. Again, we're service oriented. We believe that planning and preparation are a big part of that process. We don't like the buckshot approach in where a person would apply to a whole bunch of funders with a standard application. That's usually like 99% of the time a waste of your time, and it leaves your work unfunded. So our SP mission is to maximize the extramural support that comes to ATSU. That can come through grants, subawards, or contracts. We do this by coaching our administrators and our faculty in pre-award skills. So that's the quest to apply, to find and apply for funding, as well as our post-award team, which that's very much about grant management skills once your project is funded. We have specialists on both fronts, but the key thing, and I can't overemphasize this, is that you really need to engage with us early and often, because then we can provide the best customized support to you. That said, if you're developing a research project right now, then it might be that the research support office is really where you need to start. So well before hunting for funding, you need to initially develop your research question, your hypothesis, aims, methodology. Research support has a team who can assist you with your study design and mapping out the scholarly steps in your 10-year plan that's going to include publishing and things like that. So you probably want to check in with ATSU's research support office. And I just put a clip of their portal page on this slide. But in order to access research support, again, you go to the portal and they have an online assistance request form. So you might want to look into that and see if that's really where you need to be starting. So I'm about to dive into the budget material right now. So I thought maybe this would be a good point to check and see if we have any questions in the chat box. I'm not viewing that chat box, so if you have some questions, I'm more than happy to stop wherever we're at and answer those questions.
I did put a note in the chat box, Michelle, that would be the place to enter those, and Marcia and I will field those for you.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so assuming there aren't any right now, I'm going to go ahead and just dive in. So we're going to talk about budgeting, and we're going to talk about sponsor matches. So simply stated, a grant budget is an agreed upon plan for expending financial support. Okay, so when you propose a budget to a funder or sponsor, you really need to think about the fact that when you make that proposal, you're locking in a price for which you're willing to execute a scope of work. Grantsmanship is not like house buying. There is no opportunity for counteroffer. At least very rarely. We don't get to negotiate. So it's really critical that when we're going in the application process, that we have thoroughly anticipated the cost that it's going to take to execute a project. Now, when you're awarded a grant, the university, as the sponsoring organization, signs a legally binding agreement with that funder or that sponsor. And when we do that, we agree to follow their fiscal rules or policies. We also have to follow our own university rules and policies, and we have to follow the IRS rules and everything else the federal government says about expending money. So an important thing for us to all know is that when those three sources disagree on any sort of policy, we have to go with the most restrictive guideline. So let me give you an example. If a funder allows you to charge $100 for supper, but ATSU's limit is $40 for supper, well, guess what? We have to go with the $40 allowed by the university's travel policy. So part of what SP does in helping with budget development is help you understand all of the requirements from those three different groups and how we can plan for that well in advance. None of us here, and I assume none of you, want to go to grant jail. So please know that when you're working with us and you hear, no, you can't do that, it's because it's backed up by either a law or a university policy or some other fiscal rule about proper grant expenditure. We're not making it up for fun. We really aren't. Now, let's say you have a grant and you're getting halfway into the project or 6 months into the project and you realize that you've budgeted wrong or things are going a different direction than what you originally anticipated, and that you're wanting to make a change and reallocate your funds. Stop. Stop what you're doing and give us a call, because again, we want to go back and double check all those policies. The other thing is that legally binding contract, you said exactly how you were going to spend money. So we will often have to go back to the funder and get pre-approval before we can shift dollars between different categories or to different activities. And those pre-approvals can take time. So we're here to help you with any changes that might need to be made. But that's when you've got the grant. You know, financial management should never fall off the radar. But you and I are here today to talk about building a budget. So I'll step back and let's talk about building a budget. I think as we do this, it might serve us well to use kind of a case study. So let's pretend we have a project going on together. So you and I are working together, and we're going to try to secure some support for a public health research project that you're involved in, that you want to test a new patient education tool, and you want to test it with adolescents in a clinic setting. So that's what you've brought to me to this point. You've already formed your question. You've already laid out your aims. You know who your partners are going to be and what you're going to do, when you're going to do it. All that's in your research design, and you're showing that information, and I'm helping you to build a budget from there. So now we got to put a price tag on everything that you want to do in this research project. Notice that we start with the project design, not we start with how much the funder will pay. We don't want to go that direction. We want to figure out what it's really going to cost to do your project. So we'll use those methods or that research design that you laid out, and we're going to put this in a chronological timeline. So you may be applying for a 3-year grant. So we have to figure out where that's going to all pan out over the course of 36 months. And then I've listed 7 categories here on this slide. These are kind of the typical ones that we're going to be plopping information into our budget spreadsheets. And there's some important information about each of them. So I want to go one by one through them. So I'm going to give you Michelle's 3 rules. These are really not any rule or policy. This is just best practice. Think about things in terms of all projects require people to do work. Until we have artificial intelligence making all decisions for us, people are making decisions and people are doing the work. And guess what? I think most of us probably want to get paid at the end of the month. So the people doing the work are getting paid, and what that means is our grant budgets need to document wages and benefits, regardless of whether the sponsor's paying. So I have folks that'll come to me sometimes and say, well, this is all, within what somebody already does, or yeah, I'm just going to add this on to what I'm already doing. If a person's contribution is critical to getting the job done, then we need to allocate a portion of their time to it. And we need to obtain authorization from their supervisor, their dean, whomever, that they can allocate that university time toward that project. So even if the sponsor doesn't want to pay the FTE, employees want to get paid, it's costing the university to divert your attention to a project. And so we have to get a handle on what that cost is, that internal cost. And in SP, we record that cost on an internal spreadsheet. It's something the funder never sees, but it's something that our administrators need to know, that doing this project means you're not teaching or what have you. So we're always going to document the amount of time needed for that maybe the funder will pay for, and then the amount of time that the university is going to have to contribute as well. So a little bit more on personnel. We calculate personnel costs very precisely. We don't estimate salary, wages, benefits, ever. We get the facts from human resources. And 100% of a person is 100% of a person. So we might think about effort in terms of percent of a full week or how much of someone's FTE is used. you can't have more than 100% of someone's time. So let me give you an example here. Let's say that Terry works a regular 70-hour week in her job duties, and Jordan works a regular 40 hours a week in his job duties. Both of them are doing 100% of their job duties. So when we're calculating FTE used on a project, we have to figure how much of Terry's 70 and how much of Jordan's 40 are being used. So you can see this gets a little complicated. It's case by case, and it's frankly, it's sensitive information. We also have to remember that benefits are different for part-time versus full-time status. And we have to be conscientious about people we're proposing to hire. So a future hire has to be planned within the pay scales and the policies of ATSU. So, you know, kind of pitfalls. I've had PIs who have come to us before and say, well, I want to pay this person this much because that's what we paid them at University of Delaware. Or I really think they ought to be paid this much because they work really hard. It's going to be hard work. And those are great and altruistic things, but we have to work within the approved position titles and wages that are on file in the university's HR office. So again, another reason to come to SP, because we can get access to that sensitive information and we'll figure out what it's really going to cost, what the university is going to be willing to pay the person based on the job description that you're needing. We do handle most of the personnel budgeting, so you can lean on us for that. And it's important to remember that that salary information is very highly protected. So even when we're working with a PI and we're sending a budget back to you, there may be things that are blacked out that you're not permitted to see because of the sensitivity of the information. Generally at ATSU, PIs and PDs are full-time employees. So if we have adjuncts who are wanting to work on an ATSU project, you're generally going to want to work with a full-time colleague and be part of a project team. So let's go back to our case study. Whoops, my slides on my end are doing funny things. If we go back to our case study and think about what personnel are we going to need on our project. Let's say that we're probably going to need a PI. We're probably going to need a co-PI. And remember, we were going to be collecting information from adolescents in a clinic setting. So we may need someone, maybe a student worker, who is going to be looking at data entry, doing something with data entry. So those are our university paid employees. Now, we may also have a consulting clinician and a health educator that are interfacing with those adolescents in the clinic setting, but they're not ATSU personnel. They're not on staff here. We're going to capture their time and effort in another section of the budget. So when you're thinking about who's doing what, mark that down, but realize that they go in a different section. It's not part of personnel costs, but it'll be part of our partner costs. The next section of our kind of 7 that we talked about is equipment. And equipment may or may not be allowed by the funder. I'll tell you, it's often limited to a very small percentage of budget. Institutional policies will differentiate an equipment versus supply. And that differentiation usually is related to unit price or reusability, natural life. What a funder calls equipment and what ATSU calls equipment may be very different, usually are different, and we have to respect both of those definitions. We do this by using that internal-only spreadsheet I talked about. And so we honor the policy differences between those two organizations. We translate it into what ATSU will allow you to buy and code. So again, SP can help you with that aspect of budget building. As the PI or PD, it's your job to figure out what equipment you need, follow the policy in securing bids that meet institutional requirements, and then bring that information to us, and we can take it from there and help you. Bear in mind that anytime you're putting equipment into a proposal, it's going to require a strong justification of necessity, and that justification has to be shown in your research design and also in the narrative budget justification. So we don't want to get to the budget pages and a funder say, well, why did you write in all this? I don't even see where you're going to use it. So it's not a shopping spree. We have to be able to justify that. So let's flip back to our case study. And in this project, I'm thinking about those adolescents again, and that we're using a health education tool. So we're probably going to want to utilize maybe tablet computers to work with those patients, to have them get that patient education and complete some surveys where we're collecting data. Again, this is in the clinic setting, so it's got to be very portable. At ATSU, tablet computers would not be considered equipment because they are far less than a $5,000 threshold that we call equipment. So in our policy. Now, maybe you're gonna buy 30 tablet computers, but the unit price is far below that. So, whoops. So, you know, we would be calling that supply, and we'll get to supply a little bit later. So just a few things to think about in terms of equipment needs. Oh, yeah, not a shopping spree. I think I mentioned that. Okay, let's go to travel. When building your project budget, bear in mind that the travel also has to have a strong justification. It can't be just going to the Caribbean for the fun of it. So it has to be demonstrated in your research design or in your outcomes, because you're presenting your outcomes somewhere. And it's not sufficient to say, I need $4,000 for travel. You may say that, but we're going to have to give the detail related to that. How did we get to that total? So first we need to explain the trip's purpose and its destination. We need to be able to approximate the conference registration fees, and that would be based on the previous conference or something very similar. We're going to have to approximate the airfare and ground transportation. We're going to have to identify how many nights in a hotel you need, how many days of per diem meals you're going to need, and anything else that fits within the funding guidelines of ATSU's travel policy. Now, the travel could be required to carry out project activities, to meet with consultants, to attend training, to present findings. So all of those are legitimate reasons. And over the course of a multi-year project, you're probably going to have different kinds of travel. So again, it's really important that we can get this down on a chronological timeline. If it's over 36 months, different kinds of travel happen in that 36 months. So in our case, we're going to say that the PI needs to routinely travel to the health center location because they're going to train some intake staff. They're going to audit data collection process. Maybe they're going to conduct some focus groups with participants. So they're going to be doing ground travel to that site. The PI may also plan to present the team findings at an APHA conference at the end of year 2. So here are some different types of travel and how important it is to plan them within the 36-month project. We need to think about whether the funder is imposing a cap on travel. And if so, we're going to ask for the maximum amount we can get from the funder, but your travel may be more than that. So the university is going to have to cover the remaining balance, and that's called cost sharing. Again, this is something just like personnel cost sharing that we would show an internal spreadsheet that we were developing. Supplies, I won't spend much time here. Supplies are a broad category. And again, they usually include things that have a limited life and a low cost, well below $5,000 or below $5,000. Typical supply line items are laboratory, clinical, curricular, office supply, software supply. Once again, these things have to be detailed out in terms of a cost, quantity. We usually add in shipping and handling. So if you're going to need a chunk of things that all cost $100 each, they're probably going to fall within supply. Let me caution you about including food in your budget. I know sometimes in community outreach activities or community-based activities, we might sometimes use, going to my prior career, we might use food as an incentive, or while they're there, we're going to feed them or something along those lines. It's really important that you check the guidelines of the funder because it's often limited or entirely disallowed. And certainly when we're working with any kind of federal government, food is super, super iffy and usually not fundable. So bear this in mind. Okay, this is another big chunk. Partners, because Oftentimes, we're not doing all the work ourselves, particularly if we're doing any kind of community-based research. We're not. Partners can be classified several ways, and it's important for you as the PI when you're coming to us to be able to fully explain what you expect that partner to do, when they're going to do it, how that accomplishment will be documented, and if they need to be compensated for their work. So based on that information, we're going to help you classify the relationship so that it's mutually supportive and fiscally compliant. So I'm going to start with sub-awardee, the one in the darkest, most intense color here. A sub-awardee often performs either a significant scope of work, or they enable that work to be accomplished by providing critical resources. So in our case study, the health center that provides a nurse practitioner and a health educator in order to test the viability of that patient education tool, they're considered a sub-awardee because the implementation of the project could not happen without their physical space or without access to their adolescent patients and without the expertise of their providers. So in this situation, ATSU would extend a non-binding pre-award MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. And that outlines the scope of work and how they're going to be compensated. We'll talk a little bit more about MOUs in the next slide, but I wanted you to know that's an agreement where they're going to deliver a certain amount of goods or services in a certain amount of time. They're going to have reporting requirements, and in turn, we're going to compensate them for it. The second one is a consultant, and a consultant usually contributes personal expertise or advice based on their knowledge of a specific topic. So in our case study, we may reach out to a clinician who has successfully used a similar patient education tool because they're going to provide recommendations on how best to train the staff or how to increase patient engagement or some other expertise that they have individually. This relationship might involve a specific number of consulting days or consulting hours in exchange for compensation. So this too would be documented in that non-binding pre-award agreement. If we're funded, our intent is to do this and pay you this amount of money. The third one here is a contractor. That's a person or company that provides a routine service to clients across a broad spectrum. So in our case, a company that cleans and prepares patient survey data for analysis, we would expect them to give us a bid for their itemized services. And then we would engage them as a vendor using our institutional purchase policy. So they're a vendor that provides the same kind of service to a lot of people. And then the last one here is a consortia. And as you all know, in community-based work, consortias can be, legally, they can be an entity, it can just be a group of folks who are interested in achieving a common cause. So whether or not it's formalized, probably what we're going to get from these types of agencies or individuals are letters of support. And that letter will demonstrate maybe a need for the project, that they see a need and they really think ATSU can help them in solving that need. Or a willingness to share resources that they have to get to that common cause. Or maybe they're going to provide some key element of some sort. These folks are our stakeholders. So stakeholders usually sign a letter of support and they're usually not compensated. So documenting the partner effort. As I mentioned, pre-award MOUs are non-binding and they're dependent on funding. So if funded, we're going to do these things. If we're not funded, it's all null and void. Even though it's non-binding, we still have to structure that MOU in a way that is compliant with university standards and legally, says the things we need to say in pre-award. So we don't have PIs that go out and just create those agreements on their own. We have standard processes and templates that we're going to use in creating an MOU. These are issued by ATSU, and they show an exchange of expectations between two entities. So it's money for specific deliverables in a specific time frame. As I said, they require administrative and legal approval before they can be offered. Now, letters of support show a willingness to collaborate or make access to resources, and they don't have the monetary expectations. So we have partners sometimes that create their own letters of support. Sometimes we take a first stab at it for them to outline the things that are going to be most important to show in the proposal. So it can go either way there. Okay, I think before we go to the next slide, let me check and see if there are any questions in the chat box.
As of right now, we still have nothing.
Okay.
I do have a question now.
Sure.
Can you go into the differences between an MOU and an MOA?
You bet. So a memorandum of understanding is one that we're going to issue in the pre-award phase. So we're understanding that this is what our relationship would look like if we have a funded project. When so we prepare that, again, it goes through kind of the legal check. We have it signed off by both agencies. It has a time frame, specific deliverables, and a monetary amount. Then we submit our grant application. 6 months go by and we're funded. Okay, at that point in time, then we have to go back and look at that relationship again and say, does this still work for everyone? Here's what we said we would do. Can you now legally bind yourself through a memorandum of agreement? So the MOA, Memorandum of Agreement, is the post-award document. Does that help? Okay. I think we'll flip then to other needs. Oh, you're not muted anymore. Did you have a question?
No, I just unmuted myself to say that that did answer my question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so other needs. This is kind of a broad category. We've covered personnel, equipment, travel, supplies, and partner relationships. We've covered those 5. This 6th category is a catch-all for a variety of other expenses that have to be reasonable and justifiable to the project. And not all of these are always going to apply to your project, and they're not always going to be allowed by the funder. But it's important to think about these incidentals and try to capture funder support for it if it's allowed. So the first one that I have here, IRB fees, refers to Institutional Review Board fees. So if we're doing any kind of human subject research, we have to put together an IRB proposal ahead of time. We, being the project team, puts together an IRB proposal ahead of time. And that has to be reviewed by the IRB. There are true costs that are involved in reviewing human subject protocols. And it's not something that the university currently can capture compensation through the federal government or anywhere else. So we are obligated, when we can, to collect standard fees from the federal government or from corporations in specific projects. So I mentioned here policy number 20-116. This is the ATSU policy about IRB fees. If you're doing human subjects research, then this is a policy we need to consult in our budget building to see if it applies. Most of these are self-explanatory, but I want to hit on participant incentives because this can be a very tricky category. The university utilizes policy 20-120 to demonstrate how gift cards, money orders, or cash can be used to compensate individuals who are participating in research projects or in surveys or in studies. And again, this is something that should be carefully weighed as part of your research design, and it has to be a part of the budget justification for any project that involves human subject research. So the others, again, are rather self-explanatory. The last category, the 7th one, is a bit different. Up until this point, we've talked about things that are direct costs. But unlike the direct tangibles of salary and supply and travel, indirect costs are not easily attributed to specific projects or programs. So indirect costs, sometimes called F&A or facility and administration, are the cost of doing business. This is the overhead. It's facilities, it's human resources, it's the controller's office, it's the maintenance folks, it's depreciation, administrative expenses galore. When we can, we always need to collect those indirect costs. Now, funders treat indirect costs in a variety of ways. So I've listed 4 ways here that indirect costs may be presented by a funder. One way is our federally negotiated rate. So ATSU's rate is negotiated with the federal government is 43.5% of salary and wages, not including fringe. This type of capture of indirects would be used on things like NIH proposals, generally speaking. Okay, there are only certain circumstances we can use it. Another common way is by applying a modified total direct cost. We have MTDC. And this might be when we have a set percent, maybe 8%, is applied to the direct cost that we have, minus a few things. And then we get to a number based on that. And generally, this is used for service and education projects like HRSA. So most of our training schools work with HRSA in some way on federal training projects. And the 8% is what would 8% modified total direct cost is what we would use then. Sometimes a funder has their own established rate, and that's outlined in the funding guidelines. It could be a straight 10%. And so this type of indirect cost is really more common with foundations and funders. So if you had a $90,000 project with a 10%, you now have a $99,000 project. Okay, so pretty straightforward there. Finally, some funders don't allow indirects to be funded at all. And in this case, again, we still have to identify what that indirect cost rate should be, and we include that as part of the university's contribution in the budget. Big rule of thumb, if indirects are allowed, we have to maximize them. ATSU requires that the F&A be requested and received. But, you know, there's a win-win to it. Under the university's research reinvestment policy, if we have externally funded research grants that include the indirects, it can trigger an allocation of 25% of that indirect can go directly to the department for their expenditures. And up to 50% of that can go to the investigator on top of their salary. So there are nuances and details that you probably want to read on this in policy 20-1112. So this applies to research projects, and the research projects have to have a capture of indirects in order for us to pass that on. So you might look into that policy. And I should say at the end of this presentation, I have a slide that just lists the various policies I've mentioned. They're all available on the ATSU portal under the Human Resources page. F&A is really important for doing business. It's a win-win. It helps us keep the lights on. So we want to always try to capture that when we can. So in wrapping up kind of the information I've got here on budget, it's important that you reach out to us early and often, whether you're ready to, you think you've got the identified funder already or you're looking for a long-term search, reach out to us early and often because then we can help you more. It's important to plan your budgets by using your research design and timeline. So never approach it by, this is what the funder's going to allow. They're going to give $50,000 and I got to make my project fit within $50,000. It's better to say, this is what my project is. This is what it's, you know, this is how we do it right. And then from there, we figure out what we can capture from the funder. We have to abide by internal and external policies and rules. So again, remembering that when we say, that's not allowable, it's because there's a rule or a law that tells us it's not allowable. And we have to capture the maximum amount of indirects. When you're working with SP on budget development, there's usually going to be 3 products or artifacts that come out of that. The first is that internal budget spreadsheet. And I mentioned that. That's where we start at the very beginning and building everything, the personnel, you know, the indirect, everything that it takes to get that project together. That's what the university needs to know about the cost. Then there are typically 2 external documents, some sort of budget presentation that the funder wants that has the numerics of things, and then usually a narrative budget justification that the funder wants. And as I said before, that justification has to have been referenced in your research design and in your MOUs and all of those other things to say that it makes sense that this is what it costs. I think we've pretty much come full circle here in the idea of there's a lot that goes into budget development before we can lock a budget, and the university has to have a role in locking that budget. So even if you think you've got it all done and ready to go, our SP office has to review, make sure that everything is compliant with the funder guidelines, the university policies, that the figures are accurate, and we have to lock that budget before your proposal can be submitted. So I think we're doing okay on time. Again, this would be a fine opportunity for questions. Otherwise, I have another small section of the presentation.
Still no questions on the chat box.
Okay. Good deal. Okay, so we're going to spend a little bit of time here talking about funding matches. And most investigators are out looking, they're abreast of the research community and what they're doing, and they're looking for funding opportunities. They're probably signed up on listservs. So they're aware of their climate and what opportunities might be available. That said, sponsored programs, a big part of what we do on the pre-award side is that quest for funding. And so the types of activities that we're usually involved in is interacting with faculty to gain an awareness of your individual or collaborative research priorities so that we can put that on our radar and try to be more aware of it. Now, we clearly can't be searching for 100 faculty in depth every day, but it's on our radar, and we're on the hunt to support your work. We also provide individualized, tailored assistance. So if you say, this is my project and the parameters and kind of the hangups I've had in finding funding, can you help me in doing a targeted search? We certainly can assist with those things. We spend a lot of time analyzing funding opportunities and trying to decide if it's a priority one. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of the specific things that make a good match. But we do a lot of analysis work on funding opportunities. And what that allows us to do, while we look at it in the milieu of funding in general and what funders are looking for, we can then present that back to you and Nadine and say, this is what it really requires and what it really looks like, or unfortunately, we're not even eligible at all. We do monitor a lot of listservs and funding databases, and then we do distribute relevant information via Grants and You or targeted emails to specific groups of folks who've expressed an interest in something. So we try to get some information back out in front of you in a variety of different ways. Match considerations. I mentioned that we spend a lot of time analyzing funding opportunities so that we can, and our decision makers and our faculty can make decisions quickly of whether there's going to be a potential return on investment. So you may get an 80-page grant guidance and not know what the heck it's saying. We can help you figure out what it's saying. We try to anticipate the problems and pitfalls in advance by looking through that, and then helping stakeholders to recognize where they have competitive advantage over other applicants. So there's 5 that I've listed here. There's other things that we're looking at, but these 5 decision points are pretty universal. So first, we're going to check to see if ATSU or a specific school within ATSU is eligible to apply for funding. Institutionally, ATSU is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and that opens doors for a lot of grants. However, there are times when funders specifically forbid schools, or they may limit their funding to a specific region in the United States, or a variety of other reasons that would automatically make us ineligible. We also look to see if there are requirements for the PI or PD to be eligible, and sometimes those are specific degrees or association memberships, or they're for new investigators only, so you're within 3 years of your postdoc or something along those lines. So we look to see if our faculty can meet the funder requirements for eligibility. Next, we're looking to see if the funder's mission intersects anywhere with ATSU's mission. or with the specific work of an investigator. So I have that mission statement on my computer and use it on a daily basis to figure out, you know, where's the intersection here. An agency fit should be logical. It should never be contrived. So we're weighing in on that there appears to be a good mission match here. This is somebody who would be interested in our kind of work. As a small university with limited research capacity, competitiveness often becomes a sticking point. So SP is looking at the past funding history to get a sense of the schools, the agencies, or the individuals that a funder typically supports. This is kind of the reality check portion here. So we have to determine if we have a shot at success. If 9 out of 10 grantees are Yale, Harvard, and Johns Hopkins investigators, then we're probably not going to compete as well. So we're looking for similarities and differences between the previously funded institutions and ATSU to figure out, can we be competitive with the other folks who are putting in their applications? The complexity of the grant application and the submission timeline are also important details before a dean or a chair starts allocating people to work on a project. So we summarize this information so those decision makers can decide if the time and effort in the time that's available, you know, is a good use of faculty or other resources. And then lastly, we're going to look at the dollars available and the number of awards likely to be funded. If there are only 4 awards in the United States, the competition is likely going to be super tough, and funding is only going to go to leaders in their respective fields. But, you know, if funding is limited to those specific types of institutions that have, you know, a mission that is targeted toward health care delivery to underserved populations, well, that automatically could put ATSU at the front of the pack. So again, we're looking for the number of awards, how much is being funded, what the competition is going to look like, all that together. As I said, there's more, but those are 5 of the key areas that we're going to help our faculty and our decision makers to discern, is this something we should really be going for and spending your time on. Now, we communicate all that information in what we call a funding opportunity recommendation. And this is really a best practice of ATSU's SP team. It's not something that's necessarily seen at a lot of institutions, but we do a 1-page summary and analysis of all of those things we talked about, plus a little more. We also document the institutional history with the grant maker. So how have past applications from ATSU scored? How have they fared? What have the outcomes been? Do we have a relationship with this funder that looks pretty well, you know, looks like it's pretty feasible to continue? And then we share these 1-pagers internally with our key faculty and decision makers who need to know about that very specific opportunity. So again, it's very much customized. I think that I do have a slide again that I mentioned that talks about the different policies I've referenced today, but I think that this is this is really kind of getting to the end of the presentation and figuring out if there are any questions or specific scenarios I can help you with.
Well, so far, no one's typing any questions here.
Okay. Here are the policies, and it looks like I didn't get the right presentation up that had contact information. So if you're wanting to contact the Sponsored Programs Office, we have physical staff on the Missouri campus and on the Arizona campus. And if you're wanting to get to someone, it could be anyone in Missouri, you could call extension 2860. Yeah, extension 2860, or direct dial 660-626-2860. You could also get in touch with me. My email, again, apparently didn't make the slide, but is mmollick@atsu.edu. If you wanted to get in touch with someone physically on our Mesa campus, then you could call extension 6240. And you would reach Kathy Rushlow, who is my pre-award counterpart on that campus. So I've really talked exclusively about pre-award services today. And again, that quest for funding and getting you through the application process towards submission. But we do have a full service staff that covers 2 more branches of activity in sponsored programming. So getting your award up and going, and then managing it over the long haul. So I have lots of colleagues. And again, I've talked primarily just about pre-award. So if there aren't any questions, then that's what I have for you today. Appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit more about sponsored programs at ATSU and how when you work with us early and often, we can provide provide writing assistance, analyzing opportunities, budget development, of course, because it's clearly there's some complicating factors in budget development. So we're here to help make sure none of us go to grant jail.
Thank you, Michelle. So far, we still don't have any questions. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, it doesn't look like we're going to get any questions. Well, we appreciate your time, Michelle. This is a great presentation.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the opportunity. It is rainy and gross out in Missouri today, so I hope someone somewhere who's listening is having a beautiful day outside and gets to get away from their computer.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.